The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Great Bend, Kansas, as Gracie Newton stumbled into the small wooden chapel on the edge of town, her heart as heavy as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. It was 1876, and in the 2 years since she'd buried her parents, life had dealt her one cruel hand after another. Today was simply the day her composure finally shattered. Gracie collapsed onto a pew near the back, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that quickly grew into undisguised weeping. The chapel was empty save for her broken figure, or so she believed, until the creak of boots against the wooden floor announced another presence. She didn't look up when the weight of someone settling beside her made the bench shift. Only when a deep, gentle voice broke through her grief did she raise her tear-stained face. "I'll pray with you," he said simply. Through blurred vision, Gracie took in the man's features, weathered skin bronzed by the Kansas sun, kind eyes the color of a summer sky, and a quiet strength in the set of his shoulders. He wasn't from town, she would have remembered him. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, though cleaner than most who passed through Great Bend. No trail dust clung to his dark coat, and his hat, which he held respectfully in his hands, was of good quality. "I don't need prayers," she managed between hitched breaths. "They haven't done me much good lately," the stranger nodded, not seeming offended by her words. "Sometimes just sitting helps too. Name's Adam Blackwell," he said, then paused as though regretting the introduction. "I don't mean to intrude, but no one should have to carry their burdens alone." Something in his voice, a trace of old sorrow, perhaps made Gracie pause. She wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "Gracie Newton," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "And you're not intruding, it's a house of God. Everyone's welcome." The formality of her words seemed ridiculous given her state, and a small, unexpected laugh escaped her. "Though I doubt God planned on entertaining the likes of me today." Adam smiled, the expression warming his face. "I think he's especially partial to those who need him most." Gracie stared at the simple altar before them, adorned only with a cross and 2 candles. "Then he's had plenty of opportunity to show it." "Tough times?" Adam asked, his question gentle, inviting confidence without demanding it. Gracie hesitated. Proper young ladies didn't unburden their troubles to strange men, no matter how kind they seemed. But something about Adam Blackwell made her feel safe, perhaps the respectful distance he maintained, or the genuine concern in his eyes. "The bank is foreclosing on my parents' ranch tomorrow," she finally said, the words bitter on her tongue. 2 years I've fought to keep it running after they died. 2 years of drought and cattle disease and dishonest ranch hands, and now Mr. Phillips says he can't extend my loan anymore." Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "It's all I have left of them." Adam's expression darkened. "Jonathan Phillips, at Great Bend National," Gracie nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him," Adam replied carefully. "I've been hearing stories since I arrived, not the most charitable man." "That's putting it mildly," Gracie said. "He's buying up half the county for pennies on the dollar. Folks say he's in league with the railroad." Adam was quiet for a moment, studying his hat brim. "How much do you need to keep the ranch?" $300 by tomorrow noon, she said with a hollow laugh. "Might as well be 3,000 for all the good it does me. And if you had it, the ranch is profitable otherwise." Gracie sat straighter, a flash of pride breaking through her despair. "The Newton Ranch has some of the best grazing land in the county. We never had trouble until the drought last year killed half our herd. With a decent season and some working capital, I could make it thrive again." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "I believe you could at that, Miss Newton." "It doesn't matter now. By this time tomorrow, it'll be Philip's property." Gracie rose suddenly, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "I should go. I have to pack what's left of our belongings tonight." Adam stood as well, settling his hat back on his head. "Where will you go?" "My aunt in Topeka has offered me a place. She's been after me to move there since Mother and Father died. Says a young woman has no business trying to run a ranch alone." Gracie's voice hardened. "I'll be expected to find a suitable husband and settle into town life." "And that's not what you want." It wasn't a question, but Gracie answered anyway. "The ranch is in my blood. My father built it from nothing. I can't imagine being anywhere else." She looked up at him, suddenly curious. "What brings you to our chapel, Mr. Blackwell? You're not from Great Bend." A shadow passed over his face. "Just passing through, thought I'd stop and offer my respects." He glanced toward the altar. Sometimes a man needs to get right with God before moving forward. Gracie had the distinct impression there was more to his story, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets in the West. "Well, thank you for the company, Mr. Blackwell," she said, extending her hand. "It was kind of you to sit with me." His hand engulfed hers, calloused but gentle. "Adam, please, and the kindness was all mine, Miss Newton." "Gracie," she corrected, surprised at her own boldness. He smiled again, and something warm flickered in her chest despite her troubles. "Gracie, then." They walked together to the chapel door. Outside, the first drops of rain were beginning to fall from the gathering clouds. "Do you have far to go?" Adam asked, frowning at the sky. "The Newton Ranch is about 3 miles east of town," Gracie replied, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Adam scanned the street, his expression decisive. "My horse is at the livery. Let me give you a ride home." "This looks to be a real gully washer." Gracie hesitated. Proper young ladies certainly didn't accept rides from men they had just met. But then again, proper young ladies weren't usually facing homelessness and financial ruin either. "I would appreciate that," she said finally. "Thank you." As they hurried toward the livery, the heavens opened in earnest, and within moments they were both soaked to the skin. Despite everything, Gracie found herself laughing as they ran through the muddy streets, dodging puddles and the occasional startled chicken. By the time they reached the stables, her hair was plastered to her face and her dress clung uncomfortably to her legs. Adam didn't look much better, water streaming from the brim of his hat. "Some escort I turned out to be," he said ruefully, shaking water from his coat as they stepped inside the relative dryness of the stable. "Better wet than walking 3 miles in this," Gracie replied, wringing water from her skirt hem. The liveryman, a grizzled old-timer named Henderson, looked up from his newspaper with a raised eyebrow but made no comment about their bedraggled state. Adam paid for his horse, a magnificent black stallion that Gracie assessed with an experienced eye. "Fine animal," she commented as Adam saddled him. "Thoroughbred bloodlines." Adam looked pleased at her observation. "Part thoroughbred, part something wilder. His name's Samson." "Fitting," Gracie said, stroking the horse's gleaming neck. The animal pushed his nose against her palm, and despite everything, she smiled. Once the horse was ready, Adam helped Gracie up behind him. She hesitated only briefly before wrapping her arms around his waist. The impropriety of the situation wasn't lost on her, but the rain was falling in sheets now, thunder rolling across the prairie. "Hold tight," Adam called over his shoulder as they rode out into the deluge. The journey to the Newton Ranch was a blur of driving rain and flashes of lightning that illuminated the landscape in stark relief. Gracie held onto Adam, grateful for the solid warmth of him against the chill of the storm. By the time they reached the ranch house, the sky was darkening with both nightfall and the intensifying storm. "You should come in," Gracie said as Adam helped her down from Samson. "At least until the worst passes." Adam glanced uncertainly at the sky. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense. It's the least I can offer for the ride." Gracie led the way to the porch, fumbling with cold fingers to unlock the door. "Besides, I'm alone here now. My last ranch hand left when he heard about the foreclosure." Inside, the house was cold and dark. Gracie busied herself lighting lamps and stoking the kitchen stove while Adam saw to his horse in the barn. By the time he returned, she had a pot of coffee brewing and had changed into a dry dress, her wet hair braided down her back. "The barn is in good repair," Adam commented, hanging his wet coat and hat near the door. "Strong construction." "My father believed in building things to last," Gracie said, pride mingling with grief in her voice. She poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and set a plate of corn bread on the table. "It's not much, but it's warm." Adam accepted the coffee gratefully. "It's perfect, thank you." They sat at the kitchen table, the storm raging outside while an unexpected calm settled between them. Gracie found herself studying Adam's face in the lamplight, the straight line of his nose, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. There was something familiar about him, though she was certain they'd never met. "Have you been a rancher long?" Adam asked, breaking the silence. "All my life," Gracie answered. "I was born in this house 20 years ago. My father taught me everything he knew: how to mend fences, birth calves, predict the weather. My mother thought it terribly unladylike, but father said I had a natural gift with the land and animals. And they passed 2 years ago. Influenza," Gracie confirmed, the old pain rising. "It swept through the county. They were gone within a week of each other." "I'm sorry," Adam said simply, and Gracie believed him. "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject. "Where are you from?" Adam Blackwell, a curious expression crossed his face, caution, perhaps, or some deeper emotion she couldn't name. "Colorado originally. I've been moving around for a few years now, looking for something, or running from something." The question slipped out before Gracie could stop it. "I'm sorry, that was intrusive." Adam's smile was sad. "Maybe a bit of both. Isn't that true for most of us out here?" Gracie couldn't argue with that. The West was filled with people seeking new beginnings, often fleeing pasts they preferred not to discuss. She didn't press further. The conversation turned to safer topics: the prospects for spring grass, the latest news from back east, shared stories of life on the frontier. Despite the circumstances, Gracie found herself enjoying Adam's company. He was well-spoken and knowledgeable, listening to her with genuine interest rather than the condescension she often encountered from men. As the evening wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. Wind howled around the eaves of the house, and rain lashed at the windows. "You can't ride back to town in this," Gracie said finally. "There's a spare room upstairs. It was my father's study, but there's a cot." Adam looked uncomfortable for the first time. "Miss Newton, Gracie, I'm not sure that would be proper." Gracie laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "Mr. Blackwell, by this time tomorrow, I'll have lost my family home. I think conventional propriety is the least of my concerns right now." After a moment, Adam nodded. "If you're sure." "I am. Besides, there's no one here to scandalize." She rose, gathering their empty cups. "I'll show you upstairs." The study was small but neat, with bookshelves lining one wall and a narrow cot against another. A desk by the window still held her father's ledgers and papers, untouched since his death. Gracie lit the lamp on the desk and set a folded blanket on the cot. "It's not much," she said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's more than I've had many nights," Adam replied honestly. "Thank you." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something unspoken passed between them. For a moment, Gracie thought he might step closer, but instead he cleared his throat and looked away. "I'll leave you to rest," she said softly. "Good night, Adam." "Good night, Gracie." In her own room across the hall, Gracie lay awake listening to the storm. Tomorrow would bring the end of everything she'd fought to preserve. She should be devastated, panicked, making desperate plans, and yet, inexplicably, she felt calmer than she had in weeks. Perhaps it was simply the resignation that came with inevitability, or perhaps it was the strange comfort of having another soul in the house, even for one night. Whatever the reason, Gracie eventually drifted into the deepest sleep she'd known since her parents died, the sound of rain on the roof a lullaby that washed away her tears. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Gracie woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee brewing downstairs. For a moment, disoriented by the familiar scents and sounds, she imagined her parents were still alive and the past 2 years had been nothing but a terrible dream. Reality rushed back as she rose and dressed quickly, pinning her hair in a simple bun. Today was foreclosure day. By noon, the Newton ranch would belong to Jonathan Phillips and the bank. Downstairs, she found Adam tending the stove, a pot of coffee bubbling and a pan of frying bacon releasing mouth-watering aromas. He'd evidently been up for some time. His clothes were dried and brushed, his face freshly shaven. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the stove. "Thought you could use a hot breakfast today." Gracie was touched by the gesture. "Thank you. I don't remember the last time someone cooked for me." They ate at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the windows and illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, birds called to each other, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed plaintively. "What will happen to your cattle?" Adam asked, as if reading her thoughts. What's left of them, Gracie corrected. Phillips will probably sell them off. He's not interested in ranching just the land. She pushed her eggs around her plate. I should be getting ready. I need to be at the bank by noon. Adam set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. What if you didn't have to go? Gracie stared at him. What do you mean? What if I told you I might have a solution to your problem? Suspicion flickered across Gracie's face. She dealt with enough unscrupulous men to be wary of miraculous solutions. What kind of solution? Adam reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a leather wallet. From it, he counted out $300 in notes and placed them on the table between them. Gracie's eyes widened. Why would you? She couldn't seem to form a complete question. I want to invest in your ranch, Adam said simply. Based on what you've told me, it's a sound business decision. Good land, experienced management, just temporarily short on capital due to circumstances beyond control. Any banker with sense would see the potential. Except they don't, Gracie said, still staring at the money. No bank in the county would extend me credit. I'm not a bank, Adam replied. I'm a man who recognizes value when I see it. Gracie finally looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. You just happened to ride into town yesterday with exactly the amount I need. And you're willing to give it to a woman you just met, she pushed back from the table. What's the catch, Mr. Blackwell? Adam didn't flinch under her scrutiny. No catch. I'm proposing a straightforward business partnership. This money buys me a quarter interest in the Newton Ranch. You remain in full control of operations. I get a quarter of the profits once the ranch is back on its feet. And if it fails, if we have another drought or the market crashes or any of the 1,000 things that can go wrong on a ranch, then I lose my investment, Adam said with a shrug. That's the nature of risk. Gracie shook her head in disbelief. Why? You don't know me. You don't know this land. Something flickered in Adam's eyes, an emotion Gracie couldn't quite identify. Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see Jonathan Phillips disappointed. Gracie sat back, understanding dawning. This is personal for you. What did Phillips do to you? Adam was silent for a long moment. It's not just Phillips, he finally said. Men like him are buying up the West piece by piece, squeezing out the small ranchers and farmers who actually work the land. They don't care about the communities they destroy or the lives they upend. There was genuine passion in his voice, and Gracie believed him. Still, she hesitated. I don't make decisions lightly, Mr. Blackwell. I wouldn't expect you to, he replied. But I'm afraid this one has a deadline attached. It's already past 8. What time did you say you needed to be at the bank? Gracie's mind raced. Could she trust this man? His offer seemed too good to be true, and in her experience, such things usually were. And yet, what choice did she have? Without his money, she would lose everything by noon. If I accept, she said slowly, I want everything in writing, a proper contract, not just a handshake. Adam smiled. I'd be disappointed if you settled for anything less. Do you have paper and ink? We can draw up the agreement now and have it witnessed in town before we go to the bank. For the first time since the foreclosure notice had arrived, Gracie felt a flicker of hope. I do, in my father's study. They spent the next hour drafting a simple but thorough partnership agreement. Adam's knowledge of legal terminology surprised Gracie, as did his insistence on terms that were fair, even generous, toward her interests. He stipulated that he would have no say in the daily operations of the ranch unless Gracie specifically sought his input, that his quarter share of profits would only commence after the ranch was showing a consistent return, and that he would contribute additional capital if needed for essential improvements. You're not driving a very hard bargain, Gracie observed as she read through the completed document. I'm not a hard man, Adam replied, just a practical one. Your success is my success. By 10 o'clock, they were on the road to town. The agreement rolled carefully in Gracie's reticule, and the money secured inside Adam's coat. They rode double on Samson, Gracie again holding onto Adam's waist, though this time the contact felt different, more deliberate, charged with a tentative trust forming between them. Great Bend was already bustling when they arrived. They stopped first at the office of Harold Morrison, the town's only lawyer, who read through their agreement with raised eyebrows but no comment. He witnessed their signatures, added his official seal, and made a copy for his records. "I wish you luck, Miss Newton," Morrison said as they prepared to leave. "You've shown remarkable resilience these past years." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison," Gracie replied, touched by his words. Few in town had shown such kindness since her parents' deaths. Their next stop was the bank. Jonathan Phillips was waiting in his private office, his thin lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A portly man in his 50s, Phillips had come to Great Bend just 5 years earlier, yet had quickly established himself as one of the most powerful men in the county. "Miss Newton," he said, rising from his desk, his eyes flickered to Adam with undisguised curiosity. "I wasn't expecting you to bring company." "This is my business partner, Mr. Adam Blackwell," Gracie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're here to settle my account." Philip's smile faltered. "I'm afraid it's too late for negotiations, Miss Newton. The terms of foreclosure were quite clear." "We're not here to negotiate," Adam said, stepping forward. He placed the $300 on Philip's desk. "We're here to pay the debt in full." Philip stared at the money, then at Adam, his expression hardening. "Where did you get this?" "I don't believe that's relevant," Adam replied coolly. "The bank is owed $300. Here it is in full and on time." Phillips remained standing behind his desk, his hands clenched at his sides. "Mr. Blackwell, is it? I don't recall seeing you around Great Bend before." "I'm new to the area," Adam said, "but I recognize a good investment when I see it. The Newton Ranch has excellent prospects." "Does it indeed?" Philip's eyes narrowed. "And you came to this conclusion. When exactly?" "That's our business," Gracie interjected, impatience overriding her usual caution with the banker. "Now, will you accept this payment and consider my debt settled, Mr. Phillips?" For a tense moment, Phillips looked as though he might refuse. Then, with visible effort, he composed his features and gestured to a chair. "Please sit down, Miss Newton. There are papers to sign." His gaze shifted to Adam. "Your partner can wait outside." "Mr. Blackwell stays," Gracie said firmly. "As a part owner of the Newton Ranch, he has every right to be present for this transaction." Philip's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly and called for his clerk to bring the necessary documents. The next half hour was consumed with paperwork, Phillips watching Adam with thinly veiled hostility throughout. Adam, for his part, maintained a polite demeanor, reviewing each document carefully before Gracie signed. When the final paper was stamped and filed, Phillips handed Gracie a receipt for her payment and the canceled note of debt. "Congratulations, Miss Newton. It seems you've found yourself a guardian angel." The insinuation in his tone made Gracie's cheeks flush with anger. "I've found a business partner who recognizes the value of hard work and fair dealing, Mr. Phillips. Perhaps you should try it sometime." Without waiting for a response, she rose and walked out, Adam following close behind. They didn't speak until they were standing on the street outside the bank, the morning sun warm on their faces. "Well," Gracie said at last, relief and disbelief mingling in her voice, "I still own my ranch." "You do," Adam agreed, a smile breaking across his face. "And Phillips looked like he'd swallowed a lemon," Gracie laughed, the sound startling a nearby horse. "I've never seen him so put out. He was so certain he had me cornered." She impulsively grabbed Adam's hand and squeezed it. "Thank you, truly." Adam's smile softened as he looked down at their joined hands. "You're welcome. But remember, this is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead to make the ranch profitable again." "We," Gracie repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I thought you were just a silent partner." "I am if that's what you want," Adam said. "But I have some experience with cattle ranching. I could stay on for a while, help you get things back on track." Gracie studied him, torn between practical considerations and the instinctive caution that had served her well these past difficult years. "Where would you stay?" "I could fix up the old bunkhouse," Adam suggested. "It needs some work, but it would be comfortable enough." The idea was tempting. Gracie had been managing alone for so long. The prospect of having competent help from someone who seemed to genuinely care about the ranch's success was almost too good to pass up. And yet, "I barely know you," she said frankly. "You're asking for a considerable amount of trust." Adam nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I am, and I know trust is earned, not given, so let me suggest this. I'll stay for 2 weeks. At the end of that time, if you're not convinced I can be useful, I'll ride out and remain a silent partner as agreed. It was a reasonable proposal. 2 weeks was long enough to assess his skills and character, but short enough that she could manage if he proved disappointing. Very well, Gracie decided. 2 weeks starting today. Adam's smile returned, warming his eyes. I should warn you, I'm a hard worker. You might find yourself stuck with me. Something in his tone made Gracie's heart beat a little faster. She busied herself adjusting her bonnet to hide her flustered reaction. We'll see about that, Mr. Blackwell. Newton Ranch doesn't carry passengers. I wouldn't have it any other way, Miss Newton. They spent the rest of the morning in town, purchasing supplies and spreading the word that the Newton Ranch was not only staying in business, but looking to hire hands for the coming season. Gracie was surprised by the positive response from the townsfolk. Many had clearly assumed her failure was a foregone conclusion, but now merchants who had been reluctant to extend credit were suddenly eager for her business, and several young men expressed interest in working at the ranch come spring. Amazing how quickly attitudes change when fortune shifts, Adam observed as they loaded supplies into a wagon they'd rented for the journey back to the ranch. People respect success, Gracie replied pragmatically. And right now, standing up to Phillips looks like success to them. Phillips doesn't strike me as the type to take defeat gracefully, Adam said, his voice lower. We should be prepared for him to make trouble. Gracie nodded, having had the same thought. He's used to getting his way in this county, but we've done nothing wrong. He can't touch us legally now. Legally is one thing. There are other ways to pressure people. The concern in Adam's voice was genuine, and Gracie found herself grateful for his perspective. She'd been so focused on the immediate threat of foreclosure that she hadn't thought much about Philip's potential retaliation. Well, whatever comes, we'll face it, she said with more confidence than she felt. For now, let's get these supplies home. We have a ranch to rebuild. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to his word, Adam proved to be a tireless worker. He repaired the bunkhouse to a habitable condition within 2 days, then turned his attention to the countless maintenance tasks that had been neglected during Gracie's financial struggles. Fences were mended, the barn roof patched, a broken windmill restored to working order. Gracie watched with growing admiration as Adam tackled each job with competence and care. He clearly knew ranching from the ground up, understanding not just the how of things but the why. When they discussed plans for rebuilding the herd, his knowledge of bloodlines and grazing strategies matched her own. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the days and sharing meals in the evening. Adam was respectful of her authority on the ranch, offering suggestions rather than directives and deferring to her decisions. Yet he didn't hesitate to voice his opinion when he felt strongly about something, and Gracie found herself valuing his perspective more and more. As the 2-week trial period neared its end, Gracie realized she was no longer evaluating Adam as a potential ranch hand, but as something much more significant, a true partner in the enterprise her father had built. The thought both excited and terrified her. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Gracie finally broached the subject. Your 2 weeks are almost up, she said, her eyes on the distant horizon. Adam was silent for a moment. They are, he agreed. Have you made your decision? Gracie turned to look at him, taking in the strong profile illuminated by the fading light. I'd like you to stay, she said simply. The ranch needs you, and... She hesitated, then continued with honesty, I've grown accustomed to having you around. Adam's smile was slow and warm. I've grown accustomed to being around. Something unspoken hung in the air between them, a possibility neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Gracie looked away first, her cheeks warming. We should hire at least 2 more hands, she said, returning to safer ground. With spring coming, there's too much work for just us. I agree, Adam said, following her lead. I met a couple of promising men in town yesterday, brothers named Martinez. They worked cattle down in Texas for several years. And so the conversation continued, practical and focused, while beneath it ran a current of awareness that neither could quite ignore. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Gracie was in the barn, checking on a pregnant heifer when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Stepping outside, she shaded her eyes against the morning sun to see 3 riders approaching the ranch house. As they drew nearer, she recognized Jonathan Phillips in the lead, accompanied by 2 men she didn't know. Wiping her hands on her apron, Gracie walked toward them, tension coiling in her stomach. Adam emerged from the bunkhouse at the same moment, immediately reading the situation and moving to stand beside her. "Mr. Phillips," Gracie greeted the banker as he dismounted. "This is an unexpected visit." "Miss Newton," Phillips replied with a thin smile. "Mr. Blackwell." "I hope I find you well. What brings you out to the Newton Ranch?" Adam asked, his voice pleasant but his stance alert. Phillips gestured to his companions. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Harmon from the Kansas Pacific Railroad and Mr. Reed from the county assessor's office. We're conducting a survey of properties along the proposed route for the new spur line." Gracie exchanged a quick glance with Adam. This was the first they'd heard of any railroad spur near their property. "What spur line would that be, Mr. Phillips?" she asked carefully. Mr. Harmon, a thin man with spectacles and a city suit, stepped forward with a rolled map. "May we discuss this inside, Miss Newton? It's a matter that could be quite beneficial to your operation here." Gracie hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Of course, please come into the house." Once seated around the kitchen table, Harmon spread out his map, revealing a penciled line cutting directly across the eastern portion of the Newton Ranch. "As you can see," Harmon explained, "the proposed route would connect Great Bend more directly to the main line, significantly reducing transport time for cattle and goods. And conveniently cutting through my best grazing land," Gracie observed, her voice cold. "The railroad is prepared to offer fair compensation," Harmon continued smoothly. "Given the modest condition of your ranch, I'm sure you'll find our offer quite generous." Phillips leaned forward. "Consider it a blessing in disguise, Miss Newton. You've had a difficult time keeping this place going. This could be your opportunity to sell and start fresh somewhere more, suitable for a young woman alone." "She's not alone," Adam said quietly. His hand moved to rest near Gracie's on the table, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel its warmth. "And we're not interested in selling any portion of the ranch." Philip's eyes narrowed at the "we," but he addressed his next remarks to Gracie. "I urge you to reconsider, Miss Newton. The railroad has ways of acquiring the land it needs. Eminent domain is a powerful legal tool." "Is that a threat, Mr. Phillips?" Gracie asked, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "Merely a statement of fact," Phillips replied. "The progress of the territory can't be impeded by individual reluctance." Adam's hand finally covered Gracie's, a gesture of solidarity that gave her strength. "We appreciate you bringing this to our attention, gentlemen," he said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "We'll need time to consider the implications." "Of course," Harmon said, rolling up his map. "But I should mention that the Railroads Board meets next week to finalize the route. Decisions made after that will be less advantageous to holdouts." The 3 men rose, Phillips casting a calculating look between Adam and Gracie. "I do hope you'll be sensible about this, Miss Newton. It would be a shame to see your father's legacy reduced to nothing through stubbornness." After they had gone, Gracie paced the kitchen, her hands clenched at her sides. "The nerve of that man, coming here, threatening us with eminent domain, acting as if he's doing me a favor. It confirms what we suspected," Adam said thoughtfully. "Phillips has been working with the railroad all along. That's why he's been so aggressive about acquiring land in this area. And why he was so upset when we paid off the loan," Gracie added, the pieces falling into place. "He probably already promised the railroad he could deliver our land." Adam nodded. "The question is, what do we do now? That spur line would devastate the ranch if it goes through as planned." Gracie stopped pacing, determination hardening her features. "We fight. My father didn't build this ranch just to have it carved up by men like Phillips and Harmon." She looked at Adam, suddenly uncertain. "That is, if you're still willing to stand with me, this could get ugly." Adam closed the distance between them and, in a gesture that surprised them both, took her hands in his. "Gracie Newton, in these past weeks I've seen your strength, your intelligence, and your unwavering commitment to this land. I came here looking for a fresh start, but I've found something more valuable. His eyes held hers, intense and sincere. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever fight is coming, we face it together. Gracie's breath caught in her throat. The emotion in Adam's voice, the warmth of his hands holding hers, it was overwhelming, and yet somehow exactly right. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, impulsive kiss. When she pulled back, Adam looked stunned, and Gracie immediately felt a flush of embarrassment. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, but Adam was already shaking his head, a smile spreading across his face. Don't apologize. I've been wanting to do that since the day in the chapel. You have? Gracie asked, surprised. From the moment you looked up at me with those tear-filled eyes and still managed to be the strongest person in the room, Adam confirmed. His expression grew serious. But Gracie, there are things about me you don't know, things I need to tell you before this goes any further. A knot of apprehension formed in Gracie's stomach. What things? Adam released her hands and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Let's sit down. It's something of a long story. They settled at the kitchen table, the remains of the earlier meeting still evident in the coffee cups left behind. Adam stared into the middle distance for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then began. 3 years ago, I owned a cattle ranch in Colorado, not unlike this one. It had been in my family for 2 generations. My father built it, just as yours did. We were doing well, expanding our herd, looking to the future. Gracie listened intently, noting the pain that entered his voice. Then the railroad came, not the Kansas Pacific, but a similar story. They wanted a right-of-way through our land. When my father refused, accidents began happening. Cattle found dead, a mysterious fire in one of our barns. Nothing that could be directly traced back to the railroad, but the message was clear. That's terrible, Gracie said softly. Adam nodded, his expression grim. It got worse. My father died suddenly, heart failure, they said, though he'd never been sick a day in his life. Within weeks, the bank called in loans we didn't even know were in jeopardy. Sound familiar? Phillips, Gracie whispered, understanding dawning. Jonathan Phillips was the banker in our town before he came to Kansas, Adam confirmed. He orchestrated the whole thing. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I lost everything: the ranch, my family's legacy, my place in the community. So that's why you were in the chapel that day, Gracie said, pieces falling into place. You weren't just passing through. You came to Great Bend looking for Phillips. Adam met her eyes directly. I came seeking justice, or maybe revenge. I've been tracking Phillips for nearly 2 years, gathering evidence of his dealings with the railroads, the way he manipulates foreclosures to acquire land at fraction of its value. And then you found me, Gracie said, her voice barely audible. I found you, Adam agreed, something softening in his expression. Crying in that chapel, facing the same injustice that destroyed my family. And suddenly, revenge didn't seem as important as stopping history from repeating itself. Gracie tried to absorb the implications of his story. The money you invested is legitimate, Adam assured her quickly. After I lost the ranch, I went to work as a trail boss for a cattle company, saved every penny I earned. I'd been planning to use it to expose Phillips, maybe start over somewhere new. Instead, you used it to save my ranch, Gracie finished, emotion tightening her throat. Adam reached across the table, taking her hand again. I don't regret it, not for a moment. But I should have told you the truth from the beginning. You deserved to know who you were partnering with. Gracie was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd learned. Part of her felt deceived Adam had concealed his true purpose in coming to Great Bend, had allowed her to believe their meeting was chance rather than calculation. And yet, his actions since that day in the chapel had been nothing but honorable. He had saved her ranch, worked tirelessly to improve it, and now was prepared to stand with her against the very men who had destroyed his own life. What evidence do you have against Phillips? She finally asked. Adam looked surprised by the question. Financial records, witness testimonies, documents linking him directly to railroad land acquisitions. I have a friend, a lawyer in Denver, who's been helping me build a case. Why? A slow smile spread across Gracie's face. Because, Adam Blackwell, I think it's time we stopped playing defense and took the fight to Phillips instead. The next week was a flurry of activity. Adam sent a telegraph to his lawyer friend in Denver, requesting that he bring all evidence relating to Phillips to Great Bend as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Gracie reached out to neighboring ranchers and farmers, many of whom had also been pressured by Phillips or approached about railroad right-of-ways. They organized a meeting at the Newton Ranch to discuss strategy and share information. To their surprise, over 20 landowners attended, each with their own story of Phillips' underhanded tactics. Some had already lost portions of their land, others were fighting foreclosure notices similar to the one Gracie had received. Together, they began mapping out a pattern of behavior that extended beyond individual grievances to reveal a systematic attempt to control land development throughout the county. "He's been at this for years," one grizzled farmer named Jenkins observed as they reviewed the evidence. "Moving from territory to territory, always a step ahead of the consequences." "Not this time," Adam said firmly. "This time we have him cornered." 3 days before the railroad board was scheduled to meet, Adam's friend arrived from Denver. Richard Townsend was a sharp-eyed attorney with a reputation for taking on powerful interests on behalf of common folks. He brought with him a trunk full of documents detailing Phillips' activities in Colorado, Nebraska, and now Kansas. "It's a solid case," Townsend told them after reviewing the combined evidence. "Fraud, conspiracy, possibly even criminal coercion. If the territorial judge is honest, Phillips won't just lose his position at the bank, he could face prison." "And the railroad?" Gracie asked. "Can we stop the spur line?" Townsend was more cautious on this point. "Railroads have considerable political influence. However, if we can prove their representatives knew about Phillips' illegal activities, we might be able to force them to reconsider the route." They decided to present their evidence at the town meeting scheduled for the day before the railroad board's decision. Phillips himself had called the meeting, ostensibly, to discuss the economic benefits the new spur line would bring to Great Bend. On the day of the meeting, the town hall was packed with citizens curious about the railroad's plans. Phillips and Harmon stood at the front of the room, displaying maps and architectural drawings of a new, expanded depot. Gracie and Adam slipped in quietly and took seats near the back, accompanied by Richard Townsend and several of the ranchers who had joined their cause. "This is a historic opportunity for Great Bend," Phillips was saying, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "The Kansas Pacific Spur will connect our community directly to markets in Kansas City and beyond. Property values will rise, new businesses will flourish, and those wise enough to embrace progress will prosper accordingly." Murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. The promise of prosperity was compelling, especially in a frontier community that had seen its share of hard times. "Of course," Phillips continued smoothly, "progress requires sacrifice. The railroad must have its right-of-way. Those whose properties lie along the proposed route will be compensated fairly, though I must emphasize that the time for negotiation is limited. After tomorrow's board meeting, the terms will be considerably less generous." Richard Townsend rose to his feet. "Mr. Phillips, before anyone makes decisions based on your representations, I believe there are some facts the good people of Great Bend should be aware of." Phillips' expression darkened as he recognized Townsend. "This is not an open forum, sir. The meeting is specifically to discuss the railroad's plans." "Indeed it is," Townsend replied calmly, "and the people have a right to know the true nature of those plans and the methods used to implement them." Before Phillips could object further, Townsend moved to the front of the room, carrying a leather satchel. "My name is Richard Townsend, attorney at law from Denver, Colorado. I'm here on behalf of numerous clients who have suffered financial harm due to the manipulative and fraudulent practices of Jonathan Phillips and his associates at the Kansas Pacific Railroad." A shocked buzz spread through the crowd. Phillips' face flushed with anger. "These are slanderous accusations. Marshal, remove this man immediately." The town marshal, a weathered man named Hollister who had served Great Bend for over a decade, made no move to intervene. "I think we ought to hear what the gentleman has to say, Jonathan. Seems only fair." For the next 30 minutes, Townsend methodically presented evidence of Phillips' pattern of forcing foreclosures, manipulating land values, and collaborating with railroad interests to deprive legitimate owners of their property. He distributed copies of documents showing identical tactics used in 3 different territories, always with Phillips at the center of the schemes. Adam stood next to, recounting his own experience in Colorado, his voice steady as he described losing his family ranch through Phillips' machinations. Gracie watched the faces of the townspeople shift from skepticism to shock to outrage as the full extent of the fraud became clear. When Townsend finished, Phillips attempted to dismiss the accusations as the vengeful fabrications of failed ranchers, but his usual confidence had cracked. Harmon, the railroad representative, was already edging toward the door, clearly wanting to distance himself from the emerging scandal. "These are serious allegations," Mayor Wilson said, rising from his seat in the front row. "Mr. Phillips, do you have a substantive response to the evidence presented?" Phillips looked around the room, measuring the mood of the crowd. What he saw apparently convinced him that further denials would be futile. Without another word, he grabbed his hat and strode toward the exit, pushing past Harmon in his haste to escape. "Marshal," the mayor called, "I believe Mr. Phillips should remain in Great Bend while these matters are investigated." Marshal Hollister nodded, following Phillips out the door with a hand resting on the butt of his revolver. The meeting dissolved into excited conversation, with citizens clustering around Townsend to examine the evidence more closely or share their own experiences with Phillips' banking practices. Gracie and Adam slipped outside, needing a moment of quiet after the emotional confrontation. "I can't believe it worked," Gracie said, leaning against the hitching post in front of the town hall. Phillips looked absolutely stricken. "He never expected to be caught," Adam replied. "Men like him believe they're untouchable." Gracie studied Adam's face in the fading afternoon light. "How do you feel?" After confronting him like that, Adam considered the question. "Not as satisfied as I expected," he admitted. "Exposing Phillips won't bring back my father or restore our ranch. But it might prevent others from suffering the same fate." He turned to face her directly. "And it's given me something I never thought I'd have again, a home, a purpose. You've given me that, Gracie." "We've given each other a second chance," Gracie corrected gently. She reached up to touch his cheek, no longer hesitant about showing her feelings. "What happens now?" Adam captured her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Now we build something together, something that will last." The aftermath of the town meeting brought swift changes to Great Bend. Phillips was arrested on multiple charges of fraud and conspiracy, with additional investigations opened in Colorado and Nebraska based on Townsend's evidence. The Kansas Pacific Railroad, eager to distance itself from the scandal, publicly disavowed any knowledge of Phillips' methods and announced a review of the proposed spur line route. Within a month, the railroad presented a revised plan that bypassed the Newton Ranch entirely, instead following a route through unclaimed territory to the north. While some landowners would still be affected, the new proposal included fair compensation and preservation of access to water rights concessions, won through the collective bargaining power of the ranchers and farmers who had united against the initial plan. Spring arrived in a riot of wildflowers and new grass, and with it came fresh energy to the Newton Ranch. With the threat of foreclosure and the railroad behind them, Gracie and Adam turned their full attention to rebuilding the cattle operation. They hired the Martinez brothers as permanent hands, purchased new breeding stock, and implemented the innovative grazing methods Adam had learned during his time as a trail boss. Their partnership deepened with each passing day, evolving naturally from mutual respect to genuine affection to a love neither had expected to find. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, sharing the triumphs and setbacks that came with ranch life, their complementary strengths creating a balance that benefited them both. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset that had become their evening ritual, Adam took Gracie's hand and knelt before her. "Gracie Newton," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "when I found you crying in that chapel, I thought I was offering comfort to a stranger. I never imagined I was meeting the woman who would heal my past and become my future." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the fading light. "I love you. Will you marry me and build a life with me here on the land your father loved?" Tears filled Gracie's eyes, but unlike those shed in the chapel months ago, these were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "Yes, Adam Blackwell, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the same chapel where they had first met. The small building was filled to capacity with friends and neighbors from Great Bend, as well as ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area who had supported them in their stand against Phillips and the railroad. Richard Townsend came from Denver to serve as Adam's best man, and the Martinez brothers decorated the ranch house for the celebration that followed the ceremony. As Gracie and Adam danced under the stars that night, surrounded by well-wishers, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be married to the stranger who sat beside me in the chapel that day, I would have thought they were mad," she said, smiling up at her new husband. Adam pulled her closer, his eyes reflecting the same wonder she felt. "6 months ago, I was a man consumed by the past, seeking vengeance instead of justice. You changed that, Gracie. You changed me. We changed each other," she replied softly, "and now we have the rest of our lives to see where that change leads us." The years that followed brought the kind of happiness neither Gracie nor Adam had dared hope for after the losses they had suffered. The Newton Blackwell Ranch, as it came to be known, prospered beyond their expectations. Their innovative approaches to cattle breeding and land management earned them a reputation throughout Kansas territory, and ranchers came from as far as Texas to learn their methods. Their family grew alongside their success. Their first child, a son they named Joseph after Gracie's father, was born just over a year after their wedding. He was followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, and 3 years later by twin boys, Samuel and Thomas, who brought equal measures of joy and chaos to the ranch. Jonathan Phillips was eventually convicted of fraud and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. The scandal led to increased scrutiny of railroad land acquisition practices throughout the West, and while the railroads remained powerful, they were forced to deal more fairly with small landowners. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting in the chapel, Adam took Gracie back to the small wooden building that had been the beginning of their story. The chapel had been expanded and improved over the years, but the simple pew where they had first sat remained unchanged. "Do you ever think about that day?" Adam asked as they sat side by side, hands intertwined. "How different our lives might have been if I hadn't come in when I did, or if you'd turned away my offer to pray with you." Gracie leaned her head against his shoulder, considering. "I believe we were meant to find each other," she said finally. "Not by chance, but by something greater. Call it destiny or God's plan, but I think our paths were always going to cross." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "I thought my life was over when I lost my father's ranch. Instead, it was just beginning." He squeezed her hand. "Thank you for crying in this chapel, Gracie Newton Blackwell." She smiled up at him, the love of a decade shining in her eyes. "Thank you for sitting beside me and offering to pray, Adam Blackwell. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." As they left the chapel hand in hand, the setting sun painted Great Bend in hues of gold and purple. The town had grown considerably since their first meeting. New businesses lined the main street, the railroad depot bustled with activity, and telegraph wires connected them to the wider world. Yet some things remained beautifully unchanged. The vast Kansas sky stretching to the horizon, the fertile land that sustained them, and the love that had begun with an act of kindness in a moment of despair. Together they walked home to their ranch, their children, and the future. They continued to build a future founded on the day she was crying in the chapel, and he sat beside her and said, "I'll pray with you."